All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Camera one.
Count.
Ready, camera two.
And
One.
roll for record.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is The Rundown, where we run down some of the big stories making news. I'm your host, John Phillips. Joining us from Dallas, Texas, if you don't believe me, look at it. It's all right behind him, our pal Scott Ott. And joining me in Los Angeles is stand-up comic Steven Cruiser. Now it's time to go to the top of the rundown. And at the top of my rundown, the race for the White House is heating up, and Christie has dropped out of the top tier of candidates in Politico's caucus. The Political Caucus is made up of a bipartisan group of key activists, operatives, and leaders in Iowa and New Hampshire. Just 2 of the 81 respondents think the New Jersey governor will win their state's Republican caucus primary next year. Insiders say the New Jersey credit downgrade is a huge problem for him, as well as his big entourage and inability to listen to others. Meanwhile, former governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, continues to gain support from Republicans and high-profile donors. About 74% of New Hampshire insiders say they expect him to win that state. Meanwhile, 53% of insiders say Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker would win the Iowa primary if that were held today. Now, Cruiser, I was once a big fan of New Jersey Governor Christie. The fact that he was willing to go in to a blue state and take on the public employee unions and beat them and win re-election is a badge of honor. It's part of what I like about Scott Walker, who is my preferred candidate for president. But Christie has just had a series of blunders after a series of blunders after a series of blunders. And he's taken me, who was a former fan, and turned me into a guy that's just like, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready for somebody else.
Well, part of Christie's appeal is also contributing to his downfall. He has that old I don't give a you-know-what attitude. And then when he deals with, you say, you know, someone from a public sector union who's trying to call him out on something during a press conference or something, that's fun to watch. But when, you know, you're trying to legitimately ask questions about him and he's got the I don't have time for you, that dismissiveness of his isn't helping him. This also illustrates very clearly the difference between being a sitting governor and being a former governor. Because Bush gets to just coast along right now, and people are trying to remember, the Florida people remember, nobody else does right now. So when you're actually working, there's more to take you to task for, while Jeb just gets to run around going, I was a cool governor.
Scott, last time around we saw Mitt Romney, former governor of the state of Massachusetts, not only lose his own state, but lose the election. We saw Tom Daschle, who was the Senate Minority Leader of a very red state in South Dakota, lose re-election as Minority Leader, or I believe it was Majority Leader, maybe even, I don't know. You have Harry Reid in Nevada, who's the top targeted Democrat for the next cycle. Even though he's leadership, he's expected to lose to a popular governor. Are we now living in a cycle where red state Democrats or blue state Republicans have a very difficult time becoming national figures, where if they're seen as partisan operators or they're seen as people who are moving away from what they claim to be when they first started running for office in their state that otherwise wouldn't elect someone with their politics? Is that just too difficult a place for them to be?
Well, I think we have a similarity between Christie and Mitt Romney in this sense. Mitt Romney was the best that Republicans could hope for in Massachusetts. Christie is the best that Republicans can hope for in New Jersey. Neither one of them is the best that we should hope for nationwide. And I think that that's what cripples them. And I think when the local folks, who even those who love you as governor, start to see that you're just using it as a stepping stone for higher ambitions, then they start to get a little cynical about you, and I don't blame them. And I wonder about this whole, you know, expert political hack poll that we're looking at here. Are these the folks who really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in Iowa or in New Hampshire, or are they the ones who actually control what's going on in those states? And what's their track record of past predictions?
Little of column A, little of column B. That's my prediction. All right, Scott, what do you have for us?
Well, at the top of my rundown, ready for Hillary? Hillary who? The New York Times top political prognosticator says Hillary Clinton is more inevitable than ever. In fact, he said she was not really inevitable in 2008. Meanwhile, the Washington Post runs a piece that might lead you to ask, well, which Hillary Clinton is inevitable? Nate Cohn whips out the numbers and charts to show that Hillary would practically have to drive a car off a bridge in Chappaquiddick to lose the Democratic nomination. She now has the support of 60% of Democrat voters, compared with only 40% at this time in 2007. And yet, the Washington Post says Hillary is now rounding up a team of consumer marketing specialists who say stuff like this. "It's exactly the same as selling an iPhone or a soft drink or a cereal," said Peter Seeley, a longtime corporate marketing strategist. "She needs to use everything a brand has, a dominant color, a logo, a symbol. You know, the symbol of Mercedes is a three-pointed star. The symbol of Coca-Cola is the contour bottle. The symbol of McDonald's is the golden arches. What's Clinton's symbol?" he said. Well, man, what is Hillary Clinton's symbol? And why are Democrats so sure that they're ready for Hillary even before Hillary knows who she is?
I know her symbol, the hammer and sickle. Thumbs up from Steven Cruiser. Here's the thing. Hillary Clinton's handlers, after the 2008 debacle, where she was the favorite, she had all the money, all the endorsements, went on to run a number of other campaigns, including Christie and Quinn's mayoral campaign in New York. Another woman with all the money, all the endorsements, completely inevitable, she went on to lose to de Blasio. They then went on to work for Wendy Gruhl in Los Angeles. A woman with all the money, all the endorsements, was inevitable. She went on to lose to Eric Garcetti. They're now working for Kamala Harris in California. A woman with all the money, all the endorsements, inevitable, and could theoretically lose if Condoleezza Rice or David Dreyer or somebody like that jumps in the race. I know people think that she's inevitable. I know she's got all the money and all the endorsements. I'm still not sold that she's going to be a shoo-in.
Well, to try to intertwine all of that they were saying there, first, the whole fact that they're saying that she wasn't inevitable in 2008 is laughable, because she was inevitable then. There were people high up at News Corp running around calling her the next president of the United States. They were convinced she was going to win. Insiders were convinced. Outsiders were convinced. She was inevitable. Hillary's problems in 2008 are still Hillary's problems in 2015 and 16, and that's the part that they're trying to gloss over. You know, if you want to market her like a cereal, yes, she's a flake, okay? And she's a flake who tastes like crap. That's why that's what they're afraid of. They're trying to sugarcoat it. They're going to put a lot of sugar on this flake, but it's still going to be a soggy, old, nasty tasting flake, and they can't change that at all.
All right,
guys, are they just doing what they did with Barack Obama here? I mean, when you look at it, you can get real cynical about this and say, oh, they're trying to create Hillary Clinton. But didn't they really just develop that whole brand logo thing and the hope and the change and all that? Isn't that just part of what you have to do to market a candidate today? Yes,
but they were marketing a first-term senator who would be the first black president, who had this exotic background, and Democrats like the new shiny object. Now they're marketing a grandma who we've known about for decades. How do you put a fresh coat of paint on that?
Who does not wear well on people at all when she's she's been, you know, the handlers have to set her a little more free each day right now, and as they do, they find out just how awful she is in front of people.
All right, Cruiser, you're up next.
At the top of my rundown, President Obama vetoes the Keystone Pipeline and the jobs that go with it. The president told the Senate he takes the power of the veto seriously. He vetoed the bill due to issues of security, safety, environmental risk the project poses. This is the third veto of his presidency. An override of the Keystone veto is unlikely. A veto override vote will be scheduled for March 3rd. The nearly 1,200-mile pipeline would connect crude oil in Alberta, Canada, with an existing pipeline in Nebraska. This would allow energy company TransCanada to pump 830,000 barrels a day to refineries in the Midwest and Gulf Coast. And his stuff about the safety concerns are complete bunk. Most of that stuff has been proven wrong. But I'm curious, John, how long before we hear about this obstructionist president? When is the hue and cry going to come from the mainstream media about this obstructionist president?
Well, here's my attitude. If Joe Manchin and Heidi Heitkamp and other red state Democrats who support the Keystone Pipeline can't whip up the votes in their own caucus to override the veto, what's the purpose of having them there in Washington?
Yes.
Why not replace them with Republicans who will caucus with the Republicans and push this sort of legislation effectively? The Republicans got the votes out of their caucus. These red state Democrats now have to put up or shut up.
Scott, It's very interesting about this Keystone thing because as it's worn on, as the president has made this a protracted fight, it's gotten down to maybe him and 14 hippies who oppose this project now at this point. Yet somehow nobody on the right is able to point out that the dwindling support for this veto or anything. There really is nobody except a few special interests to whom the president is beholden who are against this anymore. Why are we struggling to make that a known fact?
Because Republicans like to play defense when they're on offense. I mean, they literally think, oh, well, yeah, let's let him veto this thing. We'll hang this around his neck during the next election cycle. But nobody's going to remember this during the next election cycle. It's not going to be a big deal then. You know, and President Obama vetoing this is, you know, he would have his true believers and followers, his fellow travelers, think that somehow, now that he's vetoed this, oil will not be transported by any means. But the truth is, the oil will be transported. It'll be transported. It'll be transported by rail car. Some of you folks may remember just last week when 8 rail cars burst into flames and some of them dumped into a creek in, I think it was Virginia or West Virginia. I forget exactly where it was now. This is happening a lot now because we have a much greater production of oil on this continent than we had before, and it's got to be transported somehow. In addition, they're going to take it by rail to the West Coast, where it's going to be put on ships and sent over to China. Every time you put oil on a ship, you take a risk. Every time you send anything to China, you send a risk. They don't have environmental protections like we do. The whole thing is absurd, even if you're a leftist.
He's brilliant at that, you know. He's anti-oil, he's anti-fracking. Yet, if this state is making a lot of money off of fracking, hey, it's all his
Wait,
he's responsible for it.
I thought you were calling Scott Ott brilliant.
Scott's brilliant too. Scott's very brilliant for pointing.
I'm just as brilliant as President Obama.
I will be quoting that play defense when they're on offense line quite a bit. Trust me on that. But he's going to do the same. He does the same thing with oil right now. You know, he's opposed to anything having to do with fossil fuels. That if the gas prices go down, it's because of him. Because of the magic light.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. I want all of you Don Drapers out there to come up with what should be Hillary Clinton's symbol as she runs for the presidency 2016. I know you'll come up with great ideas. Put it in the comments section below. I'm John Phillips for Stephen Cruiser joining me here in Los Angeles and Scott Ott in Dallas, Texas. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.